The slice of rainbow cake tumbled from my plate, landing with a splat on the pristine white tablecloth of the Magnolia Springs Country Club. Around me, the chatter of Charleston's elite continued as if nothing had happened, but I felt every eye in that sunlit dining room burning into my back. My mother's voice cut through the gentle southern afternoon like a blade through silk. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Well, I suppose we all can't be destined for greatness, Patricia Brooks announced to the table of her closest friends, her voice carrying that particular tone she reserved for maximum impact. Some children just never quite live up to expectations, no matter how hard you try to guide them. I stood frozen, watching rainbow frosting seep into the expensive fabric, my dress blues feeling suddenly suffocating in the humid Georgia air. This was supposed to be my 8-year-old niece Sophie's birthday celebration, but somehow, as always, it had become another stage for my mother to perform her favorite act, the disappointed parent of the wayward daughter. My name is Natalie Brooks, and at 27 I'd spent the last 6 years serving my country in ways I could never fully explain at family gatherings. While my sister Victoria curated her perfect Instagram life as a lifestyle blogger with 500,000 followers, I'd been working 18-hour days in windowless rooms at Fort Meade, Maryland, analyzing threat patterns and protecting national security infrastructure that most people never knew existed. The contrast couldn't have been stark. Victoria arrived at Sophie's party in her white Tesla Model S, designer sundress flowing perfectly in the manufactured breeze of the country club's entrance, her photographer husband Derek capturing every moment for her blessed Southern Belle brand. Meanwhile, I'd driven my practical Honda Civic straight from base, still wearing my dress blues because I'd been called into an emergency briefing that morning, and barely made it to Charleston in time. Natalie works for the government, my mother continued, the word government dripping with the same disdain she might reserve for sewage worker or telemarketer. Her manicured fingers gestured dismissively toward me as she addressed Mrs. Whitmore, the country club president's wife. Nothing too important, mind you, desk work, from what I understand, computers and such. The casual dismissal hit harder than any direct insult ever could. For 6 years I'd been carrying secrets that would give most people nightmares, working alongside some of the most brilliant minds in national defense, earning commendations I couldn't even mention to my own family. Just last month I'd been part of a team that prevented a major cyber attack on the nation's power grid. The citation sat in my apartment, classified and unshared, like so many others. Victoria swooped in with practiced grace, her voice honey-sweet and designed for maximum social media impact. "Oh mama, don't be so hard on Natty," she cooed using the childhood nickname she knew I hated. "Not everyone can be entrepreneurs like Derek and me. Some people are just meant for simpler lives." She adjusted her position slightly, ensuring Derek caught her most flattering angle as he filmed her candid family moment. The irony was suffocating. Victoria's entrepreneurship consisted of promoting teeth whitening kits and fast fashion to teenagers, while Derek's photography business was funded entirely by her social media income. They lived in a rented mansion they portrayed as owned, drove leased luxury cars, and maintained their lifestyle through increasingly desperate brand partnerships, and my father's quiet financial supplement. "Now Victoria," my father Robert chimed in, his voice warm with the pride he'd never quite managed to muster for me. "You're being too modest. That collaboration with Southern Charm Boutique brought in 6 figures last quarter." His chest puffed with vicarious accomplishment as other parents nodded approvingly. What he didn't mention, and what I'd accidentally discovered during my last visit home, was the stack of overdue credit card statements hidden in his desk drawer, payments he'd been making to keep Victoria's image intact. The real estate market in Charleston had been struggling, and his small agency was hemorrhaging money, but maintaining his golden daughter's facade seemed worth any sacrifice. Sophie, the birthday girl, tugged at my sleeve with 8-year-old innocence. "Aunt Natalie, why does everyone talk about mommy's work but never yours?" she whispered, her voice carrying the particular clarity that only children possess when cutting straight through adult pretense. The question hung in the air like smoke, and I saw Victoria's perfectly applied smile falter for just a moment. My mother's laugh tinkled like breaking glass as she reached down to pat Sophie's head. "Sweetheart, your Aunt Natalie's work just isn't the kind that makes families proud. Some people serve their country in ways that matter, and others," she trailed off with a meaningful shrug. The phrase landed like a physical blow, "never makes families proud." I'd heard variations of it my entire life, but somehow in this moment, surrounded by the artificial perfection of the country club, and the constructed reality of my sister's influence, It felt particularly sharp. Around the table, heads nodded in understanding. These people lived in a world where success was measured in Instagram followers, luxury car payments, and country club memberships. Military service, particularly the kind that couldn't be discussed or photographed, simply didn't register on their scale of achievement. Whitmore leaned forward with the kind of staged sympathy that Southern women had perfected into an art form. Well, bless your heart, Natalie. I'm sure what you do is very necessary. We need people to do the behind-the-scenes work, don't we? The condescension was wrapped in magnolia-scented politeness, but the message was clear: I was support staff in the grand theater of life. Derek lowered his camera for a moment, offering what he probably thought was encouragement. You know, Nat, if you ever want to transition into something more visible, Victoria and I could probably get you started with some basic social media consulting. The government experience might actually be a unique angle for personal branding. The suggestion that my 6 years of classified intelligence work was merely preparation for hawking products to teenagers on TikTok struck me as so absurd that I almost laughed. Instead, I felt something cold and sharp crystallizing in my chest, a clarity I'd learned to recognize during high-stakes briefings when crucial decisions needed to be made quickly. Victoria was back to performing for Derek's camera, her voice pitched perfectly for the Real Talk with Victoria series that had made her Charleston's premier lifestyle influencer. You know, followers, family dynamics can be so complex. Sometimes we have to love our family members exactly where they are, even when their choices don't align with our values or aspirations. The camera captured her perfectly practiced expression of gentle disappointment, mixed with magnanimous understanding. What her followers couldn't see was the way she cut her eyes toward me, making sure I understood the subtext. In Victoria's world, I was the family member who needed to be loved despite my choices, the disappointing sister whose lack of social media presence and refusal to monetize my existence made me a liability to the carefully crafted Brooks family brand. I think, my mother continued, warming to her theme as more friends gathered around our table, drawn by the familiar rhythm of family drama, that some people are just born to be followers rather than leaders. There's nothing wrong with that, of course. The world needs both types. She paused for effect, her timing honed by years of holding court in Charleston's social circles. But it does make family gatherings interesting when you have such different levels of achievement represented. The word levels hung in the air like a challenge. Around the table, I could see the other parents mentally categorizing their own children, grateful that none of them had produced a daughter who'd chosen such an unremarkable path. Military service without glory, government work without recognition, a life lived in shadows while her sister blazed across social media like a carefully orchestrated shooting star. Sophie, still clutching her birthday crown slightly askew, looked around the table with the confusion of a child trying to parse adult cruelty. But Aunt Natalie has medals, she said quietly, her voice barely audible above the orchestrated conversation. I saw them in her room when she stayed with us last Christmas. The statement caused a brief ripple of silence, quickly smoothed over by my mother's practiced laugh. Oh, sweetheart, everyone in the military gets participation trophies. It's not quite the same as real achievement. She gestured toward Victoria's corner of the table, where Derek was now live streaming their authentic family celebration to thousands of viewers who hung on every perfectly curated word. That's when it hit me, the full weight of what I'd been accepting for years. My family had no idea who I was or what I did because they'd never bothered to ask beyond the surface level. They'd constructed an image of me as the disappointing daughter, the one who'd chosen the safe, unremarkable path of government work, and they'd never questioned whether that image matched reality. They didn't know about the sleepless nights spent tracking international cyber threats. They'd never heard about the commendations locked away in my security clearance file, or the briefings where senators and generals sought my analysis. They couldn't fathom that their unremarkable daughter had helped prevent attacks that would have made national headlines if they'd succeeded. But more than that, they'd never wanted to know. My achievements couldn't be monetized, photographed, or leveraged for social capital, so they simply didn't exist in the Brooks family universe. I stood up slowly, the rainbow cake still staining the pristine tablecloth like a colorful reminder of how quickly perfection could be disrupted. Around me, the conversation continued as if my presence or absence was equally irrelevant, just another detail in the carefully orchestrated performance of Victoria's birthday party content. I think, I said quietly, my voice cutting through the ambient chatter with military precision, I'll be heading back to Maryland. Victoria's camera-ready smile flickered with genuine confusion. This wasn't in the script she'd written for the day, where I would sit quietly while being used as a foil for her success. But Natty, we haven't even gotten to the gift opening yet. Sophie was so excited to see what you brought her. The gift, a vintage compass that had belonged to my grandfather, engraved with the words True North, sat wrapped beside Sophie's pile of designer clothes and electronics. It was a gift meant for a girl who might one day need to find her own way in the world, rather than follow the predetermined path of social media stardom her parents were already mapping out for her. I'm sure Sophie will understand, I replied, my voice steady despite the storm building inside my chest. I bent down to kiss my niece's forehead, whispering, "Happy birthday, sweetheart. Remember that there are many different ways to make the world better." As I walked toward the country club's exit, I could hear my mother's voice rising behind me, already spinning the narrative for her audience. Well, that's just typical. Can't even stay for her own niece's birthday party. Some people just never learn how to put family first. The irony of that statement, coming from a woman who'd spent the afternoon publicly humiliating her own daughter for the entertainment of her social circle, wasn't lost on me. But I'd learned long ago that pointing out such ironies to Patricia Brooks was like trying to explain color to someone who'd chosen to see the world in black and white. The Georgia sun felt merciless as I walked to my Honda Civic, parked between Derek's rented Porsche and Miss Whitmore's pristine Mercedes. My practical car looked exactly like what it was, the transportation of someone who valued function over form, someone who measured success in mission accomplishment rather than social media engagement. As I drove away from the Magnolia Springs Country Club, I could see Victoria in my rearview mirror, already repositioning for another shot, Derek's camera capturing her perfectly orchestrated expression of family disappointment. By tonight, her followers would see a beautifully edited story about loving difficult family members, complete with inspirational quotes overlaid on sunset shots and affiliate links to the birthday party decoration. What they wouldn't see was the truth that had crystallized for me in that moment, that I'd been allowing myself to be cast as the supporting character in someone else's performance for far too long. They'd made their choice about who I was without ever bothering to discover who I'd become, and I'd accepted their verdict with the quiet resignation of someone who'd been trained to serve without seeking recognition. But as I merged onto I-95 North, heading back toward Maryland and the work that actually mattered, I felt something shifting inside me. For 6 years I'd protected my family's ignorance about my real life, never correcting their assumptions, never demanding the respect I'd earned through service they couldn't understand.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
The slice of rainbow cake tumbled from my plate, landing with a splat on the pristine white tablecloth of the Magnolia Springs Country Club. Around me, the chatter of Charleston's elite continued as if nothing had happened, but I felt every eye in that sunlit dining room burning into my back. My mother's voice cut through the gentle southern afternoon like a blade through silk. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Well, I suppose we all can't be destined for greatness, Patricia Brooks announced to the table of her closest friends, her voice carrying that particular tone she reserved for maximum impact. Some children just never quite live up to expectations, no matter how hard you try to guide them. I stood frozen, watching rainbow frosting seep into the expensive fabric, my dress blues feeling suddenly suffocating in the humid Georgia air. This was supposed to be my 8-year-old niece Sophie's birthday celebration, but somehow, as always, it had become another stage for my mother to perform her favorite act, the disappointed parent of the wayward daughter. My name is Natalie Brooks, and at 27, I'd spent the last 6 years serving my country in ways I could never fully explain at family gatherings. While my sister, Victoria, curated her perfect Instagram life as a lifestyle blogger with 500,000 followers, I'd been working 18-hour days in windowless rooms at Fort Meade, Maryland, analyzing threat patterns and protecting national security infrastructure that most people never knew existed. The contrast couldn't have been starker. Victoria arrived at Sophie's party in her white Tesla Model S, designer sundress flowing perfectly in the manufactured breeze of the country club's entrance, her photographer husband Derek capturing every moment for her blessed Southern Belle brand. Meanwhile, I'd driven my practical Honda Civic straight from base, still wearing my dress blues because I'd been called into an emergency briefing that morning and barely made it to Charleston in time. Natalie works for the government, my mother continued, the word government dripping with the same disdain she might reserve for sewage worker or telemarketer. Her manicured fingers gestured dismissively toward me as she addressed Mrs. Whitmore, the country club president's wife. Nothing too important, mind you. Desk work, from what I understand. Computers and such. The casual dismissal hit harder than any direct insult ever could. For 6 years, I'd been carrying secrets that would give most people nightmares, working alongside some of the most brilliant minds in national defense, earning commendations I couldn't even mention to my own family. Just last month, I'd been part of a team that prevented a major cyber attack on the nation's power grid. The citation sat in my apartment, classified and unshared, like so many others. Victoria swooped in with practiced grace, her voice honey-sweet and designed for maximum social media impact. "Oh, Mama, don't be so hard on Natty," she could, using the childhood nickname she knew I hated. "Not everyone can be entrepreneurs like Derek and me. Some people are just meant for—"
I let them live in their bubble of social media metrics and country club status while I carried the weight of secrets that kept them safe to sleep in their oversized beds. The drive back to Fort Meade gave me 4 hours to think about what had just happened, and more importantly, what I was going to do about it. The highway stretched ahead like a metaphor for possibility, each mile taking me further from the suffocating embrace of family expectations and closer to the world where my work actually held meaning. My secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message, another briefing, another crisis that needed my expertise, another chance to serve a country that valued my contributions even if my family never would. As I read the priority classification, I realized that this particular mission might finally offer me the opportunity to show Patricia Brooks and Victoria Brooks Hamilton exactly what their unremarkable daughter had been doing with her life. Sometimes the universe provides exactly the lesson people need to learn, precisely when they need to learn it. And sometimes that lesson comes with a security clearance and a phone call from the Pentagon. The encrypted message on my secure phone contained just 4 words that changed everything. Report immediately, Operation Blackwater. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I processed what this meant. Operation Blackwater wasn't just another routine briefing. It was the culmination of 18 months of investigation into a sophisticated foreign intelligence network that had been attempting to infiltrate critical infrastructure systems across the eastern seaboard. I'd been the primary analyst on this case since its inception, working with a joint task force that included FBI counterintelligence, NSA cyber operations, and Pentagon security specialists. What had started as anomalous network traffic patterns in defense contractor systems had evolved into something much more dangerous, a coordinated effort to map vulnerabilities in everything from power grids to military communications networks. The irony wasn't lost on me. While my mother had spent the afternoon explaining to her friends how I pushed papers behind a desk, I was actually racing back to coordinate a response to what could potentially be one of the most significant national security threats we'd faced in years. The government work she'd dismissed so casually was the kind that prevented the lights from going out in Charleston, the kind that kept her precious country club gatherings safe from the chaos that most people never knew was constantly lurking just beneath the surface of their comfortable lives. My phone buzzed again with a priority alert from Colonel Sarah Martinez, my direct supervisor and one of the most respected intelligence officers in the Pentagon. The message was brief but loaded with implications. Asset compromised. Full briefing in 2 hours. This is what we've been preparing for. Asset compromised. In intelligence terminology, that meant someone on the inside, someone with access to classified information, had been feeding intelligence to foreign operatives. 18 months of careful investigation was about to culminate in what would likely be the most significant counterintelligence operation I'd ever been part of. As I drove through the fading light of the Georgia countryside, my mind shifted into the analytical mode that had made me indispensable to the Pentagon's cybersecurity division. The Blackwater investigation had uncovered a network of compromised individuals across multiple agencies, all feeding information to what we believed was a state-sponsored group with capabilities that rivaled our own best offensive cyber unit. The sophistication of their operation was what had impressed and concerned our entire task force. These weren't random hackers looking for financial gain or script kiddies trying to make a statement. This was a coordinated, long-term intelligence gathering operation, designed to map our most sensitive systems and identify vulnerabilities that could be exploited during a larger conflict. My role in the investigation had been to analyze the technical aspects of the intrusions while building psychological profiles of the suspected asset. It was work that combined my computer science background with advanced training in behavioral analysis, skills I'd developed over years of specialized courses that took me away from family gatherings and social events that my family noticed but never questioned. Those missed Christmas dinners and abbreviated holiday visits weren't because I was antisocial or career-obsessed, as Victoria often implied in her social media posts about work-life balance. They were because I was often spending holidays in secure facilities, working with teams of analysts to protect infrastructure that millions of Americans depended on without ever thinking about it. The deeper we dug into the Blackwater network, the more clear it became that this operation had implications far beyond typical espionage. The targeting wasn't random. They were systematically mapping the connections between civilian infrastructure and military systems, looking for ways to cause maximum disruption with minimal direct engagement. One of the breakthrough moments in the investigation had come 3 months ago when I'd identified a pattern in the malware signatures that connected seemingly unrelated intrusions across different sectors. It was the kind of pattern recognition that required not just technical expertise but an intuitive understanding of how intelligence operations evolved over time. Colonel Martinez had called it brilliant analytical work in her classified report to Pentagon leadership, work that had earned me a commendation that would remain locked in my security file until long after the operation concluded. While my family dismissed my career as unremarkable government employment, the Pentagon was preparing to recognize my contributions to what would likely become a textbook case study in modern counterintelligence. The secure facility at Fort Meade came into view as dusk settled over Maryland, its nondescript buildings giving no indication of the critical work that happened within their walls 24 hours a day. I'd spent more time in those buildings over the past 6 years than I had in my childhood bedroom in Charleston, but to my family it was just another office building where I did whatever mundane work government employees did. The contrast between their perception and reality had never felt starker than it did in that moment. In less than 2 hours, I would be sitting in a classified briefing room with some of the most senior intelligence officials in the country, providing analysis that would shape how America responded to a sophisticated foreign threat. But according to Patricia Brooks, I'd never done anything that made the family proud. Security procedures at the facility were heightened, a clear indication that Operation Blackwater was moving into its active phase. The additional guards, modified access protocols, and restricted parking areas all signaled that whatever was about to unfold would have implications far beyond our usual intelligence gathering activity. Colonel Martinez met me at the secure entrance, her expression carrying the controlled tension I'd learned to recognize when operations moved from planning to execution phases. She was a career intelligence officer who'd risen through the ranks by consistently delivering results in situations where failure wasn't just professionally damaging, it was potentially catastrophic for national security. Brooks, she said as we walked through the series of security checkpoints that led to the classified briefing areas, what I'm about to show you represents 18 months of exceptional work by you and the entire Blackwater Task Force. In the next 48 hours, that work is going to prevent what could have been one of the most devastating attacks on American infrastructure in our history. The briefing room was filled with faces I recognized from months of late-night analysis sessions and weekend strategy meetings. FBI Deputy Director James Chen, NSA Senior Analyst Dr. Rebecca Foster, and Pentagon Intelligence Coordinator General Michael Hayes were all present, along with several other officials whose presence indicated the highest levels of government involvement. The wall displays showed network diagrams, surveillance photos, and technical schematics that represented the culmination of our investigation. At the center of it all was evidence of a planned coordinated attack on power grid systems, communications networks, and financial infrastructure that would have caused disruption on a scale that most Americans couldn't imagine. Ladies and gentlemen, General Hayes began, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd spent decades managing national security crises, thanks to the analytical work of this task force, particularly the breakthrough insights provided by Agent Brooks. We've identified and can now neutralize a foreign intelligence operation that posed an unprecedented threat to American civilian and military infrastructure. Agent Brooks, the title carried weight in this room that my family would never understand. Here my insights shaped policy decisions that affected millions of people. Here my analytical work earned the respect of generals and senior officials who trusted my judgment with matters of national security. Here I wasn't the disappointing daughter who'd never made her family proud. I was a critical asset in protecting the country my family lived in. Dr. Foster activated the main display, showing a complex network diagram that represented months of investigation and analysis. The Blackwater network consisted of 12 compromised assets across 6 different agencies, all feeding intelligence to a state-sponsored group we've designated Crimson Tide. Their goal was to establish the capability to simultaneously disrupt power grids across the eastern seaboard while compromising military communications systems. The technical details that followed would have been incomprehensible to most people, but they represented the kind of sophisticated threat analysis that had become my specialty. The malware variants, network intrusion techniques, and social engineering tactics employed by Crimson Tide represented some of the most advanced foreign intelligence capabilities we'd encountered. Agent Brooks's analysis of the malware signatures, Colonel Martinez continued, identified the connection between seemingly unrelated incidents across multiple target systems. Without that insight, we would never have recognized the scope of this operation or identified the compromised assets feeding intelligence to foreign operatives. My analysis had revealed that the attackers weren't just gathering intelligence for future use, they were positioning themselves to cause maximum disruption during a crisis or conflict scenario. The infiltration of power grid systems wasn't random, it was designed to cascade failures that would affect everything from hospitals to military installations. The sophistication of the operation was what made my family's dismissal of my work particularly painful. They lived in a world where success was measured in social media followers and country club status, while I was analyzing threats that could have left them sitting in darkness, wondering why their phones didn't work and their banks were offline. General Hayes pulled up a series of surveillance photos, showing the 12 compromised assets we'd identified through months of careful investigation. These were people who'd been recruited through a combination of financial pressure, ideological manipulation, and personal compromise, individuals who'd been turned against their own country through techniques that most people only encountered in spy novels. The planned execution date for the coordinated attack was next week, he continued, his words sending a chill through the room. Asset Communications indicated they were preparing to activate dormant malware across approximately 40 critical infrastructure targets simultaneously. 40 targets, the scope of what we'd prevented was staggering. Power grids serving major metropolitan areas, communications networks used by emergency services, financial systems that processed millions of transactions daily, and military logistics networks that coordinated defense operations across multiple time zones. FBI Deputy Director Chen activated another display showing arrest coordination maps. Based on Agent Brooks's analytical work identifying the network structure and communication patterns, we've coordinated simultaneous arrests of all 12 compromised assets across 6 states. These operations will commence at 0600 tomorrow morning. The room filled with the quiet intensity that accompanied major counterintelligence operations. Months of careful investigation were about to culminate in a coordinated response that would neutralize a threat most Americans would never know had existed. The success of these operations would depend largely on the accuracy of analysis I'd provided over the past 18 months. Colonel Martinez turned to me with the kind of professional respect that had taken years to earn. Agent Brooks, your technical analysis and behavioral profiling provided the foundation for everything we're about to execute. The network mapping, timeline analysis, and threat assessment that guided this entire operation, that was your work. The recognition felt surreal after an afternoon of being dismissed as a disappointment who'd never achieved anything worthy of family pride. In this room, my contributions were not just acknowledged, but were considered essential to protecting national security. The contrast between my family's perception and the reality of my professional life had never been more stark. Dr. Foster addressed the operational timeline. Following tomorrow morning's arrests, Agent Brooks will be part of the technical analysis team that examines the intelligence recovered from these operations. That analysis will determine the full scope of foreign intelligence gathering and help us assess any additional threats we haven't yet identified. The work ahead would be intense and demanding, requiring the kind of analytical skills and security clearance that took years to develop. It was exactly the kind of high-stakes, meaningful work that had drawn me to intelligence analysis in the first place, work that made a real difference in protecting people who would never know their safety had been threatened. As the briefing concluded and teams began coordinating the complex logistics of tomorrow's operations, I felt a profound sense of professional satisfaction. This was what I'd trained for, worked for, sacrificed social events and family gatherings for. This was why I'd chosen a career that couldn't be explained at country club dinner parties or monetized through social media partnerships. The secure communication systems buzzed with activity as field teams across 6 states prepared for coordinated operations that would neutralize one of the most sophisticated foreign intelligence threats we'd encountered. My analytical work had provided the roadmap for these operations, identifying not just who the compromised assets were, but how they communicated, what intelligence they'd gathered, and when they planned to use it. Colonel Martinez approached me as the other officials filed out to coordinate their respective aspects of tomorrow's operations. "Brooks, I want you to know that your work on this case will be recognized at the highest level. General Hayes has already initiated paperwork for a presidential unit citation for the entire Blackwater Task Force, with specific commendations for your analytical contributions." A presidential unit citation. It was one of the highest honors available to intelligence personnel, recognizing exceptional service in operations of national significance. The citation would remain classified, like most recognition in the intelligence community, but it represented acknowledgement from the highest levels of government that my work had made a meaningful difference in protecting American interests. The irony was almost overwhelming. While my mother had spent the afternoon explaining to her friends how I'd never accomplished anything that made the family proud, the President of the United States would be signing a document specifically recognizing my contributions to national security. The disconnect between perception and reality couldn't have been more complete. As I left the briefing room and headed to my office to prepare for tomorrow's analysis work, my personal phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. The message was brief and perfectly crafted for maximum impact. "Hope you're happy missing Sophie's special day for whatever it is you do up there. Some things should be more important than work." The accusation stung precisely because she had no idea how wrong she was. I hadn't missed Sophie's birthday party for routine desk work or mundane government employment. I'd left because I was racing back to coordinate the response to a foreign intelligence operation that threatened the safety and security of millions of Americans, including Sophie and every other person at that country club. But I couldn't explain that to Victoria, couldn't defend myself against accusations that were based on fundamental misunderstandings about the nature of my work and the importance of what I did. The classification levels that protected operational security also protected my family's ignorance about who I really was and what I'd accomplished in service to my country. Tomorrow morning, while Victoria was posting carefully curated breakfast photos to her Instagram story, I would be analyzing intelligence recovered from the arrests of foreign assets who had been preparing to attack American infrastructure. While she was promoting whatever product placement deal she'd arranged for the week, I would be helping to assess the full scope of a threat that could have affected millions of lives. The secure facility hummed with activity as night shift analysts took over monitoring duties and field teams prepared for operations that would begin before dawn. I had reports to review, technical analysis to complete, and briefing materials to prepare for the aftermath of tomorrow's arrest. This was my world, not the artificial performance of social media influence or the shallow validation of country club status, but the serious, meaningful work of protecting a nation from threats that most people never knew existed. It was work that required sacrifice, dedication, and skills that couldn't be measured in followers or likes or brand partnerships. As I settled into my office to prepare for what would likely be one of the most significant days of my career, I thought about Sophie's innocent question at the party. Why does everyone talk about mommy's work but never you? Tomorrow I would have an answer that I still wouldn't be able to give her, but that would matter more than all of Victoria's social media success combined. The work of protecting America rarely came with public recognition or social media validation. It happened in secure facilities, was documented in classified reports, and was recognized by people whose names never appeared in lifestyle magazines or Instagram stories. It was work that mattered precisely because it remained invisible to those it protected. Tomorrow would prove that some forms of service transcended the need for public approval or family recognition. Some contributions to society were measured not in social media metrics, but in lives protected, threats neutralized, and freedoms preserved.
Simpler lives. She adjusted her position slightly, ensuring Derek caught her most flattering angle as he filmed her candid family moment. The irony was suffocating. Victoria's entrepreneurship consisted of promoting teeth whitening kits and fast fashion to teenagers, while Derek's photography business was funded entirely by her social media income. They lived in a rented mansion they portrayed as owned, drove leased luxury cars, and maintained their lifestyle through increasingly desperate brand partnerships and my father's quiet financial supplements. Now, Victoria, my father Robert chimed in, his voice warm with the pride he'd never quite managed to muster for me. You're being too modest. That collaboration with Southern Charm Boutique brought in 6 figures last quarter. His chest puffed with vicarious accomplishment as other parents nodded approvingly. What he didn't mention, and what I'd accidentally discovered during my last visit home, was the stack of overdue credit card statements hidden in his desk drawer, payments he'd been making to keep Victoria's image intact. The real estate market in Charleston had been struggling, and his small agency was hemorrhaging money, but maintaining his golden daughter's facade seemed worth any sacrifice. Sophie, the birthday girl, tugged at my sleeve with 8-year-old innocence. Aunt Natalie, why does everyone talk about Mommy's work, but never yours? She whispered, her voice carrying the particular clarity that only children possess when cutting straight through adult pretense. The question hung in the air like smoke, and I saw Victoria's perfectly applied smile falter for just a moment. My mother's laugh tinkled like breaking glass as she reached down to pat Sophie's head. Sweetheart, your Aunt Natalie's work just isn't the kind that makes families proud. Some people serve their country in ways that matter, and others, she trailed off with a meaningful shrug. The phrase landed like a physical blow. Never makes families proud. I'd heard variations of it my entire life, but somehow in this moment, surrounded by the artificial perfection of the country club and the constructed reality of my sister's influence, it felt particularly sharp. Around the table, heads nodded in understanding. These people lived in a world where success was measured in Instagram followers, luxury car payments, and country club memberships. Military service, particularly the kind that couldn't be discussed or photographed, simply didn't register on their scale of achievement. Mrs. Whitmore leaned forward with the kind of staged sympathy that Southern women had perfected into an art form. Well, bless your heart, Natalie.
And sometimes, just sometimes, that work earned recognition from the very highest levels of government. Recognition that would finally demonstrate what real achievement looked like. The dawn raids began at exactly 0600 hours across 6 states simultaneously. From my position in the Fort Meade Operations Center, I watched real-time feeds as FBI teams executed coordinated arrests of the 12 compromised assets we'd identified through 18 months of painstaking investigation. Each arrest represented a critical node in the foreign intelligence network that had been positioning itself to attack American infrastructure. My secure workstation displayed multiple data streams showing the operations unfolding in real time. Charleston, Atlanta, Richmond, Baltimore, Philadelphia, and Boston. FBI teams were simultaneously apprehending individuals who had been feeding classified information to foreign operatives for months, some for over a year. The precision of these coordinated operations represented everything that made counterintelligence work both thrilling and terrifying. Agent Marcus Webb from the Richmond field office reported through encrypted channels that his target, a defense contractor with access to military communications protocols, had been found with detailed schematics of East Coast radar installations stored on encrypted drives. The intelligence he'd been passing could have compromised early warning systems across multiple military installations. From Philadelphia, Agent Sarah Kim confirmed the arrest of a power grid systems engineer who had been mapping vulnerabilities in electrical distribution networks serving major metropolitan areas. The technical documents recovered from her apartment showed detailed plans for cascading failures that could have left millions without power during a coordinated attack. Each successful arrest validated months of analytical work that had identified these individuals through careful analysis of communication patterns, financial irregularities, and behavioral indicators that suggested foreign intelligence recruitment. The network mapping I'd developed had predicted not just who these assets were, but how they communicated and what specific intelligence they were gathering. Colonel Martinez stood behind my workstation monitoring the incoming reports, her expression reflecting the controlled intensity that accompanied major operations. Brooks, your analysis predicted exactly what we're finding. The technical intelligence these assets collected matches perfectly with your assessment of their operational objectives. The validation was professionally satisfying, but the scope of what we were uncovering was genuinely alarming. These weren't random individuals who had been recruited opportunistically. This was a carefully orchestrated operation that had been planned and executed over years, targeting specific vulnerabilities in American infrastructure with surgical precision. Foster's voice came through the secure communications system from her coordination post at NSA headquarters. Agent Brooks, We're seeing confirmation of the malware deployment timeline you identify. Forensic analysis of recovered systems shows dormant code that was scheduled to activate next Tuesday at 0300 hours Eastern. Next Tuesday. The foreign intelligence operation had been less than a week away from executing what would have been one of the most devastating cyber attacks in American history. The timing wasn't coincidental. It was carefully chosen to maximize disruption during what intelligence suggested was planned to be a larger coordinated action. The recovered intelligence painted a picture of sophisticated planning that went far beyond typical espionage activity. The foreign operatives hadn't just been gathering information for future use, they had been positioning themselves to cause maximum chaos during what appeared to be preparation for a significant international incident. FBI Deputy Director Chen's voice crackled through the secure channels from the Washington Coordination Center. All primary targets secured. Agent Brooks, your behavioral profiles were remarkably accurate. 3 of the assets were found attempting to destroy evidence exactly as you predicted they would when cornered. The behavioral analysis component of the investigation had been one of my specializations, combining psychological profiling with technical intelligence to predict how compromised assets would react under pressure. Understanding not just what intelligence they were gathering but how they would behave when discovered had been crucial to ensuring successful arrests without evidence destruction. From my workstation, I coordinated the technical analysis of recovered materials, directing forensic examination of encrypted drives, communication devices, and documents that would reveal the full scope of the foreign intelligence operation. Each piece of evidence needed to be processed quickly to determine if there were additional threats we hadn't yet identified. The malware analysis was particularly revealing. The code recovered from compromised systems showed a level of sophistication that confirmed our assessment of state-sponsored involvement. These weren't tools available to typical criminal organizations or hacktivist groups. The malware had been specifically designed to target American infrastructure with capabilities that suggested years of development by well-funded technical teams. Agent Jennifer Torres from the Boston field office reported discovering a cache of documents that detailed contingency plans for the foreign intelligence operation. Agent Brooks, the network structure you mapped was even more accurate than we realized. We're finding evidence of backup communication methods and alternative assets that match exactly with your analysis of how this network would maintain operational security. The backup networks were something I'd theorized based on communication patterns and operational security practices typical of sophisticated foreign intelligence services. Finding confirmation of these theories in recovered documents validated analytical methods that had taken years to develop and refine. As the morning progressed, the full scope of what we had prevented became increasingly clear. The coordinated attack planned for the following Tuesday would have simultaneously disrupted power grids serving over 15 million people, compromised emergency communication systems in major metropolitan areas, and interfered with military logistics networks across the eastern seaboard. The cascading effects would have been catastrophic. Hospitals without backup power systems would have lost critical patient monitoring capabilities. Financial networks would have been unable to process transactions, effectively shutting down commerce across multiple states. Emergency services would have been operating with compromised communication systems during the chaos that would have inevitably followed. General Hayes arrived at the operations center as we began processing the initial wave of recovered intelligence. His presence indicated the significance of what we had accomplished and the importance of the analysis work that would follow. The general had spent decades managing national security crises, and his expression showed both relief and continued concern. Agent Brooks, he said as he reviewed the preliminary reports from the coordinated arrests, your analysis prevented what could have been one of the most devastating attacks on American civilian infrastructure in our history. The technical assessment and network mapping that guided these operations, that work will be studied by intelligence professionals for years to come. The recognition from such a senior Pentagon official was professionally meaningful, but the personal satisfaction came from knowing that millions of people would go about their daily lives completely unaware that their safety and security had been protected by work that remained invisible to them. My secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from an unknown sender within the Pentagon communications system. The message was brief but carried implications that immediately elevated my pulse rate. Report to Pentagon Briefing Room, Delta 7 Congressional Intelligence Committee Briefing. Your analysis presentation required. Dress blues mandatory. Congressional briefing. My analysis work was going to be presented to members of Congress who had oversight responsibility for intelligence operations and national security. The dress blues mandatory notation indicated this would be a formal recognition of my contributions to the Blackwater operation at the highest levels of government. Colonel Martinez read the message over my shoulder, her expression showing a mixture of pride and anticipation. Brooks, Delta 7 is where they brief congressional leadership on the most significant intelligence operations. Your work on this case is going to receive recognition at levels that most intelligence professionals never see. The irony was almost overwhelming. Less than 24 hours ago, my mother had been explaining to her country club friends how I'd never accomplished anything that made the family proud. This afternoon, I would be briefing members of Congress on analytical work that had prevented a catastrophic attack on American infrastructure. But the classification requirements that protected operational security meant that my family would never know about any of it. The recognition I was about to receive from some of the most powerful people in government would remain locked away in classified files, invisible to the people whose opinions had shaped my entire life. As I prepared to leave Fort Meade for the Pentagon briefing, additional reports continued flowing in from the field operations. The forensic analysis of recovered materials was revealing connections to foreign intelligence services that went beyond what we had initially suspected. This wasn't just a cyber attack operation, it was part of a larger strategic initiative aimed at testing American vulnerability to coordinated infrastructure attacks. The technical capabilities we had discovered suggested that the Foreign Intelligence Service behind the Blackwater network possessed resources and expertise that rivaled our own best offensive cyber unit. The malware they had deployed was years ahead of anything we had seen from non-state actors, indicating government-level funding and development. Dr. Foster's preliminary assessment of the recovered malware confirmed some of our most concerning theories about foreign cyber warfare capability. Agent Brooks, the code analysis shows attack vectors specifically designed to exploit vulnerabilities in systems we didn't even know were connected to external networks. The level of reconnaissance required to develop these tools indicates surveillance of American infrastructure that goes back years. Years of surveillance meant that the Blackwater operation was just the tip of a much larger iceberg. The Foreign Intelligence Service that had orchestrated this attack had been studying American infrastructure vulnerabilities for far longer than we had initially assessed, gathering intelligence through methods and sources we were still working to understand. The drive from Fort Meade to the Pentagon gave me time to review the briefing materials I would be presenting to congressional leadership. The technical analysis, network mapping, and threat assessment that had guided the successful operations represented some of the most important work of my career. But translating complex intelligence analysis into language accessible to elected officials required careful preparation. The Pentagon's parking security was heightened, another indication of the significance of the briefings taking place that afternoon. Additional guard posts, modified access procedures, and restricted zones all signaled that multiple high-level intelligence briefings were occurring simultaneously, likely covering various aspects of the foreign intelligence threat we had neutralized. Security processing at the Pentagon took longer than usual, with additional identity verification and background checks that indicated the classified level of the briefings I would be attending. The dress blues mandatory requirement made sense once I saw the other officials arriving for similar briefings. This was formal recognition at the highest levels of government. Briefing room Delta 7 was located in one of the most secure areas of the Pentagon, accessible only to personnel with the highest levels of security clearance and specific authorization for each briefing. The room itself reflected the gravity of the discussions that took place there, with advanced secure communication systems and classified display capability. General Hayes was already present when I arrived, along with Colonel Martinez and several other senior intelligence officials whose presence indicated the scope of what would be discussed. The congressional delegation included members of both the House and Senate Intelligence Committees, individuals who had oversight responsibility for the most sensitive national security operations. Senator Elizabeth Warren from the Senate Intelligence Committee reviewed the briefing materials as I prepared my presentation workstation. Her questions during the preliminary discussion showed a sophisticated understanding of cyber warfare threats and the implications of what we had prevented. Agent Brooks, she began as the formal briefing commenced, Your analysis identified and helped neutralize what appears to be one of the most sophisticated foreign intelligence operations targeting American infrastructure that we've encountered. Can you walk us through how you identified this network and assessed the scope of the threat they represented? The presentation that followed covered 18 months of investigation, condensed into a comprehensive overview that demonstrated both the sophistication of the foreign intelligence operation and the analytical methods that had identified and neutralized. The technical details were complex, but the implications were clear. We had prevented an attack that could have affected millions of American lives. Congressman Adam Schiff from the House Intelligence Committee focused on the broader strategic implications. Agent Brooks, based on your analysis, this operation appears to have been part of a larger strategic initiative. What does this tell us about foreign intelligence capabilities and their intentions regarding American infrastructure? The question required careful analysis of intelligence that went beyond the specific Blackwater operation. The capabilities we had discovered suggested that foreign intelligence services were developing the ability to conduct coordinated attacks on civilian infrastructure that could cause disruption on a scale that most people couldn't imagine. The briefing continued for over 2 hours, with detailed questions about analytical methods, threat assessment procedures, and the broader implications of what we had discovered. Each question demonstrated the sophistication of congressional oversight and the genuine concern of elected officials about protecting American infrastructure from increasingly sophisticated threats. As the formal briefing concluded, General Hayes addressed the congressional delegation with words that would have meant everything to my family if they could have heard them. Ladies and gentlemen, Agent Brooks represents the very best of American intelligence professionals. Her analytical work prevented what could have been a catastrophic attack on our homeland, and her contributions to national security exemplify the highest standards of service to our country. The recognition from such senior officials in front of congressional leadership represented validation at levels that most people never experienced in their entire career. But the classification requirements that protected operational security meant that my family would never know that their disappointing daughter had just been praised by generals and senators for work that had protected millions of American lives. After the congressional briefing, Colonel Martinez approached me with documents that would formalize the recognition I had earned through my work on the Blackwater operation. Brooks, these are the authorization papers for your Presidential Unit citation and individual commendation for exceptional analytical service. The formal ceremony will take place next week with Pentagon leadership and selected congressional representatives in attendance. A formal Pentagon ceremony with congressional representatives. The highest levels of government recognition for intelligence work that had prevented a catastrophic attack on American infrastructure. Recognition that would remain classified and invisible to the family who had spent years dismissing my career as unremarkable government employment. The contrast between my professional reality and my family's perception had never been more stark. While they measured success in social media followers and country club status, I had just received recognition from the Pentagon and congressional leadership for work that had protected the very infrastructure that made their comfortable lives possible. As I left the Pentagon that afternoon, my secure phone buzzed with another encrypted message that would change everything. Agent Brooks, report to Secure Communications Facility tomorrow 0800 hours. Pentagon press briefing coordination required. Partial declassification, authorized for public recognition ceremony. Details to follow. Public recognition ceremony, partial declassification. The words carried implications that made my pulse race. For the first time in my career, some aspects of my work were going to be made public, which meant that my family might finally understand exactly what their disappointing daughter had been doing with her life. The Secure Communications Facility at Fort Meade buzzed with activity as media relations specialists prepared for something unprecedented in the intelligence community, a partial declassification ceremony that would publicly recognize the prevention of a major foreign attack on American infrastructure. The decision to make portions of the Blackwater operation public had come from the highest levels of government, driven by the need to demonstrate American intelligence capabilities while maintaining operational security. Colonel Martinez briefed me on the extraordinary circumstances that had led to this decision. Brooks, the Foreign Intelligence Service behind the Blackwater Network has been conducting similar operations against our allies across Europe and Asia.
I'm sure what you do is very necessary. We need people to do the behind-the-scenes work, don't we? The condescension was wrapped in magnolia-scented politeness, but the message was clear. I was support staff in the grand theater of life. Derek lowered his camera for a moment, offering what he probably thought was encouragement. You know, Nat, if you ever want to transition into something more visible, Victoria and I could probably get you started with some basic social media consulting. The government experience might actually be a unique angle for personal branding. The suggestion that my 6 years of classified intelligence work was merely preparation for hawking products to teenagers on TikTok struck me as so absurd that I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I felt something cold and sharp crystallizing in my chest, a clarity I'd learned to recognize during high-stakes briefings when crucial decisions needed to be made quickly. Victoria was back to performing for Derek's camera, her voice pitched perfectly for the Real Talk with Victoria series that had made Charleston's premier lifestyle influencer. You know, followers, family dynamics can be so complex. Sometimes we have to love our family members exactly where they are, even when their choices don't align with our values or aspirations. The camera captured her perfectly practiced expression of gentle disappointment mixed with magnanimous understanding. What her followers couldn't see was the way she cut her eyes toward me, making sure I understood the subtext. In Victoria's world, I was the family member who needed to be loved despite my choices, the disappointing sister whose lack of social media presence and refusal to monetize my existence made me a liability to the carefully crafted Brooks family brand. I think, my mother continued, warming to her theme as more friends gathered around our table, drawn by the familiar rhythm of family drama, that some people are just born to be followers rather than leaders. There's nothing wrong with that, of course. The world needs both types. She paused for effect, her timing honed by years of holding court in Charleston's social circles. But it does make family gatherings interesting when you have such different levels of achievement represented.
The administration has decided that publicly exposing this network will serve as both a deterrent and a warning to other nations about the consequences of attacking American infrastructure. The implications were staggering. My analytical work wasn't just being recognized within classified intelligence circles. It was going to be presented as an example of American intelligence capabilities to audiences around the world. The technical analysis and network mapping that had identified the foreign intelligence network would become part of a coordinated international response to state-sponsored cyber warfare. Media Relations Director Amanda Foster from the Pentagon press office reviewed the declassified portions of my analysis that would be presented during the public ceremony. Agent Brooks, your work represents exactly the kind of intelligence success story that demonstrates the value of American investment in cybersecurity and counterintelligence capabilities. The President specifically requested that your contributions be highlighted during the public recognition ceremony. The President specifically requested. The words carried weight that would have been incomprehensible to my family just days earlier. While they had been dismissing my career as unremarkable government work, the President of the United States had been reviewing my analysis and specifically requesting that my contributions be publicly recognized. The declassification process had been carefully managed to protect ongoing operations, while revealing enough detail to demonstrate the sophistication of both the foreign threat and the American response. Technical aspects of my malware analysis, network mapping methodologies, and threat assessment procedures would remain classified, but the overall scope of what we had prevented would be made public for the first time. General Hayes arrived at the facility with a delegation of senior Pentagon officials, their presence indicating the significance of the public ceremony being planned. The general's expression showed both pride in the successful operation and awareness of the strategic implications of making portions of it public. Agent Brooks, he said as the briefing began, what you accomplished through your analysis of the Blackwater network will be studied by intelligence professionals around the world. The decision to publicly recognize your contributions sends a clear message about American capabilities and the consequences of attacking our infrastructure. The technical details of the public presentation had been carefully crafted to reveal the sophistication of American intelligence capabilities without compromising operational method. The Foreign Intelligence Network structure, communication methods, and planned attack timeline would be disclosed, along with enough technical detail to demonstrate the advanced analytical capabilities that had identified and neutralized the threat. Rebecca Stone from the National Security Council explained the broader strategic context that had led to the decision for public disclosure. Agent Brooks, your analysis revealed that the Blackwater network was part of a coordinated international campaign targeting infrastructure in multiple allied nations. By publicly exposing these operations, we're coordinating with our allies to demonstrate unified resolve against state-sponsored cyber warfare. International coordination meant that similar recognition ceremonies were being planned in allied nations where parallel intelligence operations had identified related foreign networks. My analytical work had not only protected American infrastructure but had contributed to a broader international response to coordinated state-sponsored attacks on civilian systems. The media preparation sessions were unlike anything I had experienced in my intelligence career. Pentagon media specialists coached me on presenting technical analysis to audiences that included journalists, congressional representatives, and international observers who would be attending the public ceremony. Communications Director Michael Chen from the National Security Council emphasized the historic nature of what was being planned. Agent Brooks, this will be the first time in decades that the intelligence community has publicly recognized specific analytical work that prevented a major attack on American infrastructure. Your ceremony will set precedents for how we acknowledge exceptional intelligence work in the future. Setting precedents for public recognition of intelligence work carried responsibilities that extended far beyond personal acknowledgement. The success of this public ceremony would influence future decisions about declassifying intelligence successes, potentially changing how the intelligence community balanced operational security with public accountability. As preparations continued throughout the morning, my personal phone began receiving an unusual volume of calls and messages from my family in Charleston. The caller ID showed repeated attempts from my mother, father, Victoria, and even Derek, all within the span of 2 hours. The frequency suggested something significant had prompted their sudden interest in contacting me. I ignored the calls while focusing on preparation for the afternoon media briefing, but the messages that began accumulating revealed what had triggered their attention. Victoria's voicemail was particularly telling. Natalie, people are asking me about some government thing involving our family name. My followers are sending me links to news articles that mention a Brooks from Fort Meade. You need to call me back immediately. News articles mentioning a Brooks from Fort Meade. The advance media preparation for the public ceremony had apparently begun generating speculation in intelligence community publications and defense industry media. Someone had connected the name from preliminary press releases to our triggering exactly the kind of attention that Victoria craved but had never expected to receive through her estranged sister. My mother's voicemail revealed her characteristic approach to unexpected developments. Natalie, Patricia Whitmore called me this morning asking about newspaper articles that mention our family name in connection with some Pentagon announcement. I told her there must be some mistake, but she seemed quite insistent. Call me back so we can clarify this confusion. Even when presented with evidence that her daughter might be involved in something significant, Patricia Brooks' first instinct was to assume there had been some mistake rather than acknowledge that her assessment of my career might have been incomplete. Colonel Martinez reviewed the final schedule for the public ceremony as additional family messages continued accumulating on my phone. Brooks, the ceremony is scheduled for tomorrow at 1400 hours in the Pentagon briefing auditorium. Media attendance includes representatives from major national networks, defense industry publications, and international press covering intelligence cooperation initiatives. Major national network. The recognition I was about to receive would be broadcast to audiences that potentially included millions of viewers, including family members who had spent years dismissing my career as unremarkable government employment. The irony of the situation was almost overwhelming. The technical presentation I would deliver during the ceremony had been rehearsed multiple times to ensure that declassified information was presented clearly while maintaining security around operational details that remained classified. The balance between public recognition and operational security required careful preparation that left nothing to chance. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin arrived at the facility for a final briefing on the strategic implications of the public ceremony. His presence indicated the highest levels of government involvement in the decision to publicly recognize intelligence work that typically remained classified indefinitely. Agent Brooks, the secretary began as the senior level briefing commenced. Your analytical work prevented what intelligence assessments indicate could have been the most devastating foreign attack on American civilian infrastructure since Pearl Harbor. The decision to publicly recognize your contributions reflects both the exceptional nature of your work and the strategic importance of demonstrating American intelligence capabilities. Pearl Harbor. The comparison provided context for the significance of what we had prevented that went far beyond typical intelligence success. The foreign intelligence operation had been positioned to cause disruption on a scale that would have affected millions of lives and potentially triggered international incidents with unpredictable consequences. The Secretary continued with details that revealed the full scope of what my analysis had uncovered. The technical intelligence recovered during the arrests shows that the foreign network had been gathering reconnaissance on American infrastructure for over 3 years. Your analysis identified not just the immediate threat but exposed a comprehensive intelligence gathering operation that had been preparing for coordinated attacks on multiple fronts. 3 years of foreign reconnaissance. The sophistication of the operation we had neutralized was even more extensive than initial assessments had indicated. The Foreign Intelligence Service had been systematically studying American infrastructure vulnerabilities, with the patience and resources of a state-sponsored operation planning for long-term strategic objectives. As the briefing concluded and final preparations began for tomorrow's ceremony, my phone displayed over 30 missed calls and messages from family members whose attention had been captured by preliminary media reports. The sudden interest from people who had dismissed my career for years created a complex mixture of vindication and frustration. Victoria's latest message revealed the social media angle that had captured her attention. Natalie, my Instagram followers are asking me about Pentagon news articles that mention our last name. This could be incredible content for my brand if you're actually involved in something newsworthy. Call me back so we can coordinate posting about this. Coordinate post. Even when confronted with evidence that her sister might be involved in significant national security work, Victoria's immediate response was to consider how it could be leveraged for social media content and brand promotion. The self-centered perspective that had characterized our relationship for years remained unchanged even in the face of potentially extraordinary circumstances. My father's voicemail showed a slightly different approach, but still reflected the fundamental disconnect between my family's understanding and my professional reality. Natalie, your mother is quite concerned about these newspaper articles that mention our family name in connection with some Pentagon announcement. We're hoping you can explain what kind of administrative mistake might have occurred to create this confusion. Administrative mistake. Even my father, when presented with evidence that his daughter might be involved in something significant, assumed that it must be some kind of error rather than acknowledge that their understanding of my career might have been fundamentally incorrect. The evening news broadcasts began featuring preliminary reports about the planned Pentagon ceremony, with intelligence community reporters speculating about the nature of the operation that would be publicly recognized for the first time in decades. The coverage included enough detail about foreign infrastructure attacks to generate significant public interest in tomorrow's ceremony. CNN's national security correspondent reported that unnamed Pentagon sources described the prevented attack as potentially catastrophic, with implications that could have affected millions of Americans across multiple states. The scope of what we had prevented was beginning to reach public awareness, setting the stage for tomorrow's detailed disclosure. As I reviewed my presentation materials one final time, the contrast between my family's perception and the reality of tomorrow's ceremony felt almost surreal. In less than 24 hours, I would be standing in the Pentagon briefing auditorium, receiving recognition from the Secretary of Defense and senior congressional leaders for work that had prevented what officials were describing as potentially catastrophic attacks on American infrastructure. The recognition would be broadcast to national and international audiences, covered by major media networks, and documented as historic acknowledgement of intelligence work that typically remained classified. Yet my own family's initial reaction had been to assume that any connection between our name and Pentagon announcements must be some kind of administrative error. My secure phone buzzed with a final encrypted message from General Hayes. Agent Brooks, tomorrow's ceremony represents unprecedented public recognition for intelligence work of the highest caliber. Your contributions to national security exemplify the very best traditions of American intelligence service. The entire intelligence community will be watching as we demonstrate how exceptional analytical work protects American lives and interests. The entire intelligence community would be watching. The ceremony wasn't just personal recognition. It was a demonstration to intelligence professionals around the world of how American analytical capabilities could identify and neutralize sophisticated foreign threats to civilian infrastructure. As I prepared for what would likely be the most significant day of my professional life, my personal phone continued buzzing with increasingly frantic messages from family members who were beginning to realize that their understanding of my career might have been fundamentally flawed. The final message of the evening came from my 8-year-old niece Sophie, sent from Victoria's phone with characteristic childhood directness. "Aunt Natalie, Mommy says you might be on TV tomorrow for something important. Will you really be on the news?" I told my friends at school that my aunt works for the government and does secret things to keep people safe. Out of the mouths of babes, Sophie's innocent understanding of my work was actually more accurate than anything her parents or grandparents had ever acknowledged. While the adults in my family had dismissed my career as unremarkable, an 8-year-old had somehow grasped that I was involved in work that mattered. Tomorrow would reveal whether public recognition of my contributions would finally bridge the gap between my family's perception and the reality of what I had accomplished in service to my country. The ceremony would demonstrate that their disappointing daughter had actually prevented what officials described as potentially one of the most devastating attacks in American history. The irony of the situation was perfect in its completeness. While my mother had been explaining to her country club friends how I had never accomplished anything that made the family proud, I had been working to prevent attacks that could have left those same friends sitting in darkness, wondering why their phones didn't work and their comfortable lives had been disrupted by forces they never knew existed. Tomorrow that work would finally receive the public recognition it deserved, and my family would discover that their assessment of my life and career had been as fundamentally flawed as their understanding of what real achievement actually meant. The Pentagon briefing auditorium, filled with an unprecedented gathering of media representatives, congressional leaders, and senior intelligence officials as the historic ceremony prepared to begin. Camera crews from CNN, NBC, ABC, and Fox News positioned their equipment alongside international correspondents from the BBC, Deutsche Welle, and other allied nation networks who would broadcast the recognition ceremony to global audience. I stood in the preparation area behind the main auditorium, wearing my dress blues with the decorations that represented 6 years of classified service most people would never understand. The weight of the moment was extraordinary. For the first time in decades, the intelligence community was publicly recognizing analytical work that had prevented a major foreign attack on American infrastructure. Colonel Martinez performed a final inspection of my uniform while reviewing the presentation timeline one last time. "Brooks, in 10 minutes you'll walk onto that stage and receive recognition from the Secretary of Defense, congressional leadership, and senior Pentagon officials for work that prevented what could have been the most devastating attack on American civilian infrastructure in our history." Through the preparation area monitors, I could see the audience taking their seats in the auditorium. Senior congressional representatives from both intelligence committees, Pentagon leadership, and media correspondents who specialized in national security coverage filled the space with an atmosphere of anticipation and gravity. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin approached as final sound checks were completed on the presentation systems. "Agent Brooks, what you accomplished through your analysis represents the very best of American intelligence capability. Today's ceremony will demonstrate to allies and adversaries alike the sophistication of our counterintelligence operations and the dedication of professionals like you, who protect our nation." The Secretary's words carried weight that extended far beyond personal recognition. This ceremony was strategic communication to international audiences about American intelligence capabilities, using my specific analytical work as an example of how the United States identified and neutralized sophisticated foreign threats. My personal phone, switched to silent mode, displayed over 60 missed calls and messages from family members whose attention had been captured by morning news coverage of the planned ceremony. Charleston's local news stations had apparently picked up the national coverage, connecting the Brooks family name to the Pentagon announcement and triggering exactly the kind of social scrutiny that Victoria normally craved. The morning news coverage had been extensive. CNN's national security correspondent had reported that the planned Pentagon ceremony will recognize intelligence work that prevented coordinated attacks on power grids, communication systems, and financial networks across multiple states. The scope of what we had prevented was finally reaching public awareness. NBC's intelligence reporter had added context that brought the threat into stark relief, Pentagon sources describe the prevented attacks as potentially affecting over 15 million Americans, with cascading effects that could have disrupted everything from hospital systems to emergency services communications. The human impact of what my analysis had prevented was becoming clear to audiences who typically never considered such threats. General Hayes entered the preparation area with the formal recognition documents that would be presented during the ceremony. Agent Brooks, these citations represented acknowledgement from the highest levels of government that your analytical work exemplifies the finest traditions of American intelligence service. The Presidential Unit citation being awarded today recognizes contributions that protected millions of American lives. Presidential Unit citation, the highest recognition available to intelligence personnel, signed by the President and recognizing work of exceptional national significance. The same document would be presented to the entire Blackwater Task Force, but individual commendations would specifically acknowledge my contributions to the analytical breakthrough that had identified the Foreign Intelligence Network. The audio system crackled with the ceremony coordinator's voice announcing the 5-minute warning. In 5 minutes, I would walk onto a stage where my work would be recognized by some of the most powerful officials in American government, broadcast to national and international audiences, and documented as historic acknowledgement of intelligence success.
The word levels hung in the air like a challenge. Around the table, I could see the other parents mentally categorizing their own children, grateful that none of them had produced a daughter who'd chosen such an unremarkable path. Military service without glory, government work without recognition, a life lived in shadows while her sister blazed across social media like a carefully orchestrated shooting star. Sophie, still clutching her birthday crown slightly askew, looked around the table with the confusion of a child trying to parse adult cruelty. "But Aunt Natalie has medals," she said quietly, her voice barely audible above the orchestrated conversation. "I saw them in her room when she stayed with us last Christmas." The statement caused a brief ripple of silence, quickly smoothed over by my mother's practiced laugh. "Oh, sweetheart, everyone in the military gets participation trophies. It's not quite the same as real achievement." She gestured toward Victoria's corner of the table, where Derek was now live streaming their authentic family celebration to thousands of viewers who hung on every perfectly curated word. That's when it hit me. The full weight of what I'd been accepting for years. My family had no idea who I was or what I did because they'd never bothered to ask beyond the surface level. They'd constructed an image of me as the disappointing daughter, the one who'd chosen the safe, unremarkable path of government work, and they'd never questioned whether that image matched reality. They didn't know about the sleepless nights spent tracking international cyber threats. They'd never heard about the commendations locked away in my security clearance file, or the briefings where senators and generals sought my analysis. They couldn't fathom that their unremarkable daughter had helped prevent attacks that would have made national headlines if they'd succeeded. But more than that, they'd never wanted to know. My achievements couldn't be monetized, photographed, or leveraged for social capital, so they simply didn't exist in the Brooks family universe. I stood up slowly, the rainbow cake still staining the pristine tablecloth like a colorful reminder of how quickly perfection could be disrupted. Around me, the conversation continued as if my presence or absence was equally irrelevant, just another detail in the carefully orchestrated performance of Victoria's birthday party content. "I think," I said quietly, my voice cutting through the ambient chatter with military precision, "I'll be heading back to Maryland." Victoria's camera-ready smile flickered with genuine confusion. This wasn't in the script she'd written for the day, where I would sit quietly while being used as a foil for her success. "But Natty, we haven't even gotten to the gift opening yet. Sophie was so excited to see what you brought her." The gift, a vintage compass that had belonged to my grandfather, engraved with the words True North, sat wrapped beside Sophie's pile of designer clothes and electronics. It was a gift meant for a girl who might one day need to find her own way in the world. Rather than follow the predetermined path of social media stardom her parents were already mapping out for her. "I'm sure Sophie will understand," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm building inside my chest. I bent down to kiss my niece's forehead, whispering, Happy birthday, sweetheart.
The irony of the moment was overwhelming. 3 days ago, my mother had publicly dismissed my career, while explaining to her country club friends that I had never accomplished anything that made the family proud. This afternoon, the Secretary of Defense would be presenting me with recognition for work that had protected the very infrastructure that made their comfortable lives possible. Through the preparation area monitors, I could see the ceremony beginning as senior officials took their positions on the main stage. The formal protocol for Pentagon recognition ceremonies was precise and dignified, reflecting the gravity of both the threats we faced and the work required to counter them. Secretary Austin approached the podium as the auditorium settled into attentive silence. Ladies and gentlemen, today we gather to publicly recognize intelligence work that exemplifies the highest standards of American national security service. The operation we celebrate today prevented what our intelligence assessment indicates could have been one of the most devastating foreign attacks on American civilian infrastructure since Pearl Harbor. The comparison provided historical context that conveyed the significance of what we had prevented to audiences who might not otherwise understand the scope of modern cyber warfare threats. The foreign intelligence operation had been positioned to cause disruption on a scale that would have affected millions of lives and potentially triggered unpredictable international consequences. The Secretary continued with declassified details of the Blackwater operation that revealed the sophistication of both the foreign threat and the American response. Throughout 18 months of meticulous investigation and analysis, a joint task force including FBI counterintelligence, NSA cyber operations, and Pentagon intelligence specialists identified and neutralized a state-sponsored network that had been positioning itself to attack power grids, communication systems, and financial networks, serving over 15 million Americans. 15 million Americans. The human scale of what we had prevented was staggering when expressed in such concrete terms. Those weren't abstract numbers in intelligence reports, they represented millions of individuals whose daily lives would have been disrupted by attacks they never knew had been planned against the infrastructure they depended on. The analytical breakthrough that identified this network, Secretary Austin continued, was achieved through exceptional work by Agent Natalie Brooks of the Pentagon Intelligence Division. Agent Brooks's technical analysis and behavioral profiling provided the foundation for successful operations that neutralized 12 compromised assets and prevented coordinated attacks that were scheduled to begin within days of our intervention. My name, spoken by the Secretary of Defense in the Pentagon briefing auditorium, broadcast to national television audiences and documented in official Pentagon records. The recognition was public, permanent, and represented validation at levels that most people never experienced in their entire careers. The Secretary gestured for me to join him at the podium as the audience of senior officials and media representatives rose in recognition. Walking across that stage represented the culmination of 6 years of work that had been invisible to my family and most of the world, but had been essential to protecting the infrastructure that millions of Americans depended on without thinking about it. Agent Brooks, the Secretary said as I reached the podium, your analytical work represents the very best of American intelligence capability. The network mapping, malware analysis, and behavioral profiling that guided the successful Blackwater operation demonstrated technical expertise and analytical insight of the highest caliber. The formal presentation of the Presidential Unit citation included words that would have meant everything to my family if they could have understood their significance. For exceptional analytical service in identifying and neutralizing foreign intelligence operations targeting American civilian infrastructure, demonstrating the finest traditions of dedication to protecting American lives and interests. Congressional representatives from both intelligence committees rose as the citation was presented, their applause representing acknowledgement from elected officials who had oversight responsibility for the most sensitive national security operation. The recognition wasn't just from the Pentagon, it was from the legislative branch that represented the American people my work had protected. As the formal ceremony concluded and media representatives prepared their coverage of the historic recognition, my phone buzzed with an encrypted message that indicated additional developments were unfolding. The message was from NSA Deputy Director Sarah Chen. Agent Brooks, international intelligence sharing based on your analysis has led to coordinated arrests in allied nations. Your work prevented attacks beyond American borders. International implication. My analysis hadn't just protected American infrastructure, it had contributed to identifying foreign intelligence networks that had been preparing similar attacks against allied nations. The recognition ceremony was taking place simultaneously with similar operations in European capitals where parallel intelligence work had been guided by analytical methods I had developed. The media coverage that followed the ceremony was extensive and detailed, with national security correspondents explaining the significance of publicly recognizing intelligence work that typically remained classified. The strategic communication value of the ceremony was clear. It demonstrated American intelligence capabilities while warning potential adversaries about the consequences of attacking civilian infrastructure. CNN's coverage included expert analysis from former intelligence officials who provided context for viewers who might not understand the significance of what had been prevented. This type of coordinated attack on civilian infrastructure represents a new category of threat that requires exactly the kind of sophisticated analytical work that Agent Brooks demonstrated, explained former CIA Deputy Director Michael Morrell. NBC's report focused on the international cooperation aspects that had emerged from the American investigation. Intelligence sharing based on the Blackwater analysis has led to arrests and operations in at least 4 allied nations, demonstrating how American intelligence work protects not just our own infrastructure, but contributes to global security, reported correspondent Andrea Mitchell. As I left the Pentagon following the ceremony, my phone displayed over 100 missed calls and messages from family members whose understanding of my career had been fundamentally altered by the national television coverage. The sudden attention from people who had dismissed my work for years created a complex mixture of vindication and exhaustion. Victoria's voicemail revealed her characteristic approach to unexpected developments. "Natalie, I cannot believe you didn't tell us about any of this. My followers are going crazy asking about my sister who apparently prevented some major attack on America. I need you to call me back immediately so we can coordinate how to handle this media attention. This could be incredible for both our brands. Coordinate how to handle media attention." Even when confronted with recognition for work that had protected millions of lives, Victoria's immediate response was to consider how it could be leveraged for social media promotion and personal branding. The self-centered perspective that had characterized our relationship remained unchanged. My mother's message showed her struggling to process information that contradicted years of dismissive assumptions. "Natalie, I've been watching the news coverage all afternoon, and I'm having difficulty understanding how this connects to the desk work you told us you did. Patricia Whitmore has been calling me every hour asking for details about your Pentagon recognition, and I honestly don't know what to tell her." The admission that she didn't know what to tell her friends represented a crack in the certainty that had allowed my mother to dismiss my career for years. The public recognition was forcing acknowledgement that her understanding of my work had been fundamentally incomplete. My father's voicemail carried a tone of confusion mixed with what might have been the beginning of pride. "Natalie, your mother and I watched the Pentagon ceremony on television and were trying to understand how your government computer work connected to preventing attacks on power grids and communication systems. Could you help us understand what you've actually been doing all these years?" The question represented acknowledgement that their assumptions about my career might have been wrong, but it also revealed how completely they had misunderstood the nature and significance of my work in intelligence analysis and national security. The drive back to my apartment in Maryland gave me time to process the overwhelming contrast between the morning's recognition and years of family dismissal. In a single day, I had received acknowledgement from the Secretary of Defense, congressional leadership, and national media for work that my family had assumed was unremarkable government employment. The evening news coverage continued throughout the night, with follow-up reports exploring the broader implications of the prevented attacks and the intelligence methods that had identified the foreign network. Expert analysis from former officials and academic specialists provided context that helped general audiences understand the significance of what had been accomplished. Fox News brought on former NSA Director General Keith Alexander to explain the technical aspects of the intelligence work that had been recognized. The type of network analysis that Agent Brooks conducted requires not just technical expertise but the kind of analytical insight that takes years to develop. This represents some of the finest intelligence work I've seen in decades of national security service. The recognition from such respected former officials validated both the technical quality of my work and the significance of the threats we had prevented. General Alexander's assessment carried weight with audiences who might not otherwise understand the complexity of modern counterintelligence operations. As I reached my apartment, I found Derek waiting in the parking lot beside his Tesla, camera equipment visible through the car window. Victoria's husband had apparently driven up from Charleston to capture content for whatever social media strategy they had developed to capitalize on the sudden family connection to national security news. "Nat, he called as I approached the building entrance, his voice carrying the artificial enthusiasm he used for his photography clients. Victoria sent me up to get some footage for her Instagram story about having a Pentagon-recognized sister. This is incredible content for her brand, the lifestyle influencer with the secret agent sister angle. Secret agent sister angle. The reduction of 6 years of serious intelligence work to social media content strategy encapsulated everything that had driven me away from family gatherings and social events. Even recognition from the highest levels of government was immediately filtered through the lens of how it could be monetized for online audience. I walked past Derek without responding, using my building's security access to avoid any obligation to participate in content creation for Victoria's social media empire. The contrast between the afternoon's solemn recognition ceremony and this immediate attempt to exploit it for lifestyle branding was almost too stark to be real. My apartment felt like a sanctuary after the intensity of the day and the surreal encounter with Derek's content creation ambition. The secure communication systems that connected my home to Fort Meade buzzed with encrypted messages from colleagues congratulating me on the historic public recognition, but the personal phone displayed increasingly frantic attempts by family members to reach me. Victoria's latest voicemail revealed the depth of her confusion about the disconnect between the sister she thought she knew and the intelligence professional who had been recognized by the Pentagon. Natalie, I've been reading news articles about your ceremony all evening and I honestly don't understand how the person they're describing connects to you. The Natalie in these articles prevented major attacks and briefed congressional leaders, but you've always been so quiet and unremarkable at family events. Quiet and unremarkable. The characterization that had defined my family's perception for years suddenly felt like vindication rather than criticism. The qualities they had interpreted as lack of ambition or achievement had actually been the discretion and professionalism required for work that couldn't be discussed at country club dinner parties. My mother's final message of the evening showed her beginning to grapple with the implications of what she had witnessed. Natalie, I keep thinking about what I said at Sophie's birthday party, about how some people never make their families proud. Watching you receive recognition from the Secretary of Defense today, I'm starting to realize that perhaps I didn't understand what you were accomplishing in your career. Perhaps she didn't understand. The careful qualification revealed how difficult it was for Patricia Brooks to acknowledge that her assessment of her daughter's life might have been fundamentally flawed. The recognition ceremony had created cognitive dissonance that would require time to resolve. The most meaningful message came from Sophie, sent from Victoria's phone with characteristic 8-year-old directness. Aunt Natalie, I saw you on TV getting a medal from important people. Mommy and Grandma keep saying they didn't know you did secret things to keep people safe, but I always knew you were special. When can I see your medal? Out of the mouths of babes. Sophie's innocent awareness that her aunt did secret things to keep people safe had been more accurate than anything the adults in the family had ever acknowledged. An 8-year-old had somehow grasped what her parents and grandparents had missed for years. The following morning brought additional media coverage as news organizations explored the broader implications of the intelligence operation that had been publicly recognized. International correspondents reported on related arrests in allied nations, demonstrating how American analytical work had contributed to a coordinated response to foreign infrastructure threats. The Wall Street Journal published a detailed analysis of the economic implications of the prevented attacks, with economists calculating that the coordinated infrastructure disruptions could have caused billions of dollars in economic damage across multiple states. The human and financial costs of what we had prevented were becoming clear to audiences who typically never considered such vulnerability. My secure phone buzzed with a message from Colonel Martinez. Brooks, international intelligence community response to yesterday's ceremony has been extraordinary. Allied intelligence services are requesting briefings on your analytical methods, and several universities want to develop case studies based on your work. Your methods are going to influence intelligence training for years to come. The recognition was extending beyond personal acknowledgement to become educational material that would help train the next generation of intelligence professionals. The analytical methods I had developed through years of classified work would contribute to protecting infrastructure far beyond what I had personally helped secure. As I prepared for what would likely be a series of classified briefings with Allied intelligence services, my personal phone displayed a message that indicated my family's perspective was beginning to shift in more fundamental ways. The message came from my father. Natalie, your mother and I would like to invite you to dinner this weekend so we can properly congratulate you on your Pentagon recognition. We realize we have a lot to learn about what you've been accomplishing in your career, a lot to learn. The acknowledgement represented more progress than I had seen in years of family interactions. The public recognition had created an opportunity for genuine understanding that might bridge the gap between their perception and the reality of my professional life. Victoria's latest message showed her struggling to reconcile the sister she thought she knew with the intelligence professional who had been recognized by the Pentagon. Natalie, I keep reading articles about your analytical work and congressional briefing, and I'm realizing that I never really understood what you did for work. I'd like to talk when you have time, not for social media content, just to understand who my sister actually is. Not for social media content. The qualification suggested that Victoria was beginning to grasp that some aspects of life couldn't be reduced to online content and brand development. The recognition ceremony had apparently created awareness that her sister's work existed in dimensions that couldn't be measured in followers or engagement metrics. The weekend dinner invitation represented an opportunity I had never expected, a chance for my family to understand the person I had become through years of service they had never bothered to explore. The public recognition had created a bridge between their world of social media metrics and country club status and my reality of protecting infrastructure that millions of people depended on. As I considered whether to accept their invitation, I thought about the 8-year-old girl who had always somehow known that her aunt did important work to keep people safe. Sophie's innocent understanding had been more accurate than anything her parents or grandparents had acknowledged, and she deserved to see that medal she had asked about. The recognition ceremony had changed more than just public perception of intelligence work. It had created an opportunity for family reconciliation based on understanding rather than assumption. The daughter they had considered a disappointment had actually been protecting the very infrastructure that made their comfortable lives possible. Perhaps it was time to let them learn who their daughter and sister had actually become during those years of quiet service they had never bothered to understand. The work would continue, the threats would persist, and the intelligence community would keep protecting people who never knew they needed protection. But maybe, finally, my family would understand that some forms of achievement couldn't be measured in social media followers or country club recognition. The phone rang with another encrypted message from Fort Meade, another briefing, another threat assessment, another opportunity to serve a country that valued contributions even when they remained invisible to most people. As I prepared to return to work that would likely never again receive public recognition, I reflected on how the recognition ceremony had revealed truths that went far beyond intelligence operations and family dynamics. Sometimes the most important work happened in shadows, protected by classification levels that kept families ignorant about the dedication of people who served without seeking recognition. And sometimes, just sometimes, that work received acknowledgement that demonstrated what real achievement actually meant to the people whose lives it protected. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them.